Definitely the polls, and there are all kinds of polls that come out nationally assessing the public's perception of the value of higher education. What's the public's perception of the value of higher education? And that has declined. Nothing to do with the University of Florida, just it's declined for all of higher education. That is obviously concerning, particularly for a public university.
Dr. Fuchs, you were a professor in Illinois, then you became the dean, the head of the School of Engineering at Purdue University, then the dean at Cornell University, later the provost, and then famously you became the University of Florida president, in which you served 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. And you moved on from that position, and now you are a professor of computer engineering or computer electrical engineering at the University of Florida.
Yes.
So thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I wanted to first go into very big perspective, right? Very high level of what was like being a university president, because that's probably the thing that I want to really focus on. Your career as a president, decisions that you made, what were your thinking, what were the pressures, all of that stuff. So for sure, we can just start with what is a president, because most people would say is the most public, the first person that comes to mind, or like the people that point to and say, okay, this is like almost like a head of PR, in a sense that you're the face of the university. That's what I was trying to say, right? You're the face of the university, but for sure there's more than that, right? So what were exactly the roles that you had? And also I think a bit more interesting is what freedom you had in determining those roles for yourself.
Sure. Well, good. Thanks, Andres, for inviting me, letting me be a part of your podcast. I was president for 8 years and just loved it. Loved being the University of Florida president, but have also enjoyed the other positions that you mentioned. It's been almost 40 years. I'm in my 40th year as a faculty member or administrator. So, and I'm coming full circle, as you said, by now, teaching. I'm teaching Introduction to Electrical Engineering. I've got 80 first-year students, which is a lot of fun. So it is a really visible position, being the university president, and certainly more visible than any other position I've had. Many students, undergrad and grad, will know who the dean is of their college, or maybe even the dean of students. They might know who your department chair is.
Even maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But they won't know, for example, usually, who the provost is of the university. It's kind of an invisible position. Yeah. And in fact, I wrote a column.
It's one of the most important ones, right?
It's really important.
Yeah.
And that's one of the positions I had at Cornell. In fact, I wrote a column in the Alligator. I would write a monthly column and to the student newspaper. And it was about who is the provost and what is the provost. And I gave a prize, which was tickets to the football game in the president's suite, for the first person to send me a picture of University of Florida's provost. Okay.
Funny, a picture with them with the provost? They did with you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah, not with me, but with the provost, because I was the president. And,
right, like they usually do with you, like they take selfies with you.
Yeah. So, and the reason I did that was just to introduce people to the concept of the provost. The provost oversees the whole academic mission, almost everything you experience. Not athletics, not
medical.
Yeah, not so much a medical, but but the deans report to the provost. So, but president, everybody knows who the president is. When I was president, if I walked around campus, not only would people recognize me, but they would know how to pronounce my last name, which nobody else does. So you are the face of the university. I thought of the job as having two parts. One is communicating on behalf of the university. So that could be, and that's really leveraging this visibility. That could be, as I mentioned, a column in Alligator. It could be a one-on-one meeting with the donor. It could be a speech, commencement speech, for example. So communicating, that was about half of the job. And the other half was working to bring resources to the university, funding. And that could be donors. And we worked hard on what's called a capital campaign, a fundraising campaign in my 8 years. And then it could be state dollars. And we may want to talk about that because we're unique in the state of Florida about how much our state supports higher ed. Or it could be federal dollars. We get a lot of federal funding, as most research universities do, or companies. We're in Malachowski Hall here, where my office is, and there are a lot of companies coming and going in this building all the time. So about half the time was working to bring funding to the university, and so that was the job. It wasn't a position that I went to grad school for. I didn't think I would become a president, and when I was a faculty member, I didn't even want to be an administrator. I wanted to teach courses and work with grad students and things like that. But through sets of opportunities, I had the possibility and took advantage of some of those leadership jobs that you mentioned. And it was the same way with the president. I didn't really pursue it, but after a while, you realize you're
good at it.
Well, you realize you've had whatever success you're going to have, okay, in your current position, and then you think about, is it time to go back to being a faculty member, or should I look at something else? And it depends. I wasn't really good at mapping out my career. It was always a matter of, for me, opportunities. I tell others, be a little more purposeful than I was in thinking about your career. Okay.
You did not end up pretty bad, right?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Fortunately, I had opportunities that I did take advantage of and those and looked at those. Yeah.
So you mentioned the provost. And you also mentioned that you were the face. I wanted to explore what, in the terms of decision makings of the university, what is your relationship for yourself as a president in there, and maybe the provost and maybe the board of directors, as I understand, that also has a big play into what the decisions are.
Yes.
Because in some way, do you have to answer to the board of directors? I think so.
Yeah.
So how's that relationship? Like, how does the decision making split happens, at least in UF, because I imagine it's different in other universities.
Yeah, every university kind of has its own culture and way of operating, although there's some themes. And it's different between a state-supported university, a public university like ours, and a private. I came from Cornell, where I was at a private. Yep. Even though it got some state dollars, but it's private. And you have just different kinds of things you can do in publics and privates. It's not that one is better than the other, and it's not that one has more resources. It's just different. So
in what ways? So if we can do like a small tangent.
Yeah. So for example, at a private university, you have fewer constituents or groups that you have to answer to if you're a senior leader. So as a public university, every citizen of the state feels like they own the state of the University of Florida.
I see.
And you also have elected officials, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the governor, and then you have a board of governors. I won't go through all of the governing structure, but there are just a lot more. At Cornell, we had board of trustees. That's it. And you obviously have alumni, and you have students, and you have faculty, but you don't have a lot of others that do control your destiny. We're all state employees, all of us as faculty and as staff here and as leaders. And the legislature and the governor has ultimate say over our resources, and they also pass laws. So we didn't have that at Cornell. You don't have laws that are very much governing things that you can do. You have overarching laws. You have to obey the law, but you don't have, law that says you can only use these funds for this kind of purpose. So you have to learn how to lead. You have, so you're constrained by those things, and I worked hard, not always successfully, to work hard. I worked hard with, for example, elected officials, to tell them that we're not a state agency. Often they have different agencies within the state government that are part of the state government. We're not a state agency. Yes, we're part of the state of Florida, but we're an entity that's competing globally, and we're an entity that's competing across the nation, and we're competing for federal dollars, we're competing for students, we're competing for faculty, and for us to flourish, which will benefit the state of Florida, we need not more regulation, but less regulation. So I wasn't always successful, because there are always, every year, new laws getting passed that control the university. But I worked hard because I believe sincerely that the university, if it has more room to maneuver and do different things, new initiatives, and not be constrained by lots of laws, we can be even more successful, because we're competing globally, and we're not just competing with the private universities or other big state universities like Michigan or Berkeley or Stanford or MIT, but we're competing with universities in Europe and Asia and South America. So so you are constrained, and you asked about the relationship internally to the university, say between the provost and the board of trustees. I did mention that not only do we have a board of trustees, but we also have a board of governors that oversees all the universities. And that has changed over the years, but it has also grown in its influence on the universities like Florida State, us, UCF, all of the public universities. And there's a separate board for the state colleges, but those universities are governed as well by not just their local board of trustees, but this board of governors. So it you learn as a leader how to achieve goals that you have for what you're overseeing, but yet abiding by the governing structure. And it's not simple. It's not easy. My philosophy as president was to empower the leaders that are across the university and not to centralize many of the decisions. So for example, and the reason for that is because I had, as you mentioned, I had been the head of a school at Purdue, so like a department chair. I had been a dean, I had been a provost, so I knew how those roles can benefit the university and the leadership. And I also knew when I was, for example, the head of the School of Electrical Engineering at Purdue, that the president didn't know everything that was good for our school, okay?
For
sure. And the same with the dean.
So the more autonomy that you had, the better your department.
That was my philosophy, and I really believe it, and I just like I did for the whole university. So as I believe the provost at the time, Joe Glover, will testify, I took a lot of things that were in the president's office and moved them to the provost, and that empowered him, but it also gave me more time to work on communications and work on big strategy and work on bringing resources to the university. So that's my philosophy. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can talk about, and also I imagine that Joe, the provost Glover, did the same thing. So he empowered.
That's what I wanted him to do. Yeah.
His
Yes.
deans to take on as much autonomy as they
Right.
can, make as best decisions I can for them
Yeah.
specifically. So that's pretty awesome. You talked about your philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you wanted to focus more on communication,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you did. Like definitely, as you mentioned, you became some sort of a celebrity on campus. You were walking the streets, people recognized you, and at least for me, it was very interesting that you not only had a reputation of being a celebrity, you had a specific personality. You were kind to students, you talked to them, you took selfish, and even I think more interesting was that you did jokes, you fooled around, you had fun, you did pranks.
Right.
Like famously, you did like a very funny. I didn't really see it until after the April Fool's joke with FSU and UF trying to merge. you dressed up as Darth Vader in the football stadium and started dancing. I thought those were generally funny. Like I thought, and I really enjoyed those. However, it was interesting to see that maybe the president could be associated with more like a serious role of like a person that is like in his office all the time, doing this, doing that, busy stuff. So why did you do all of that? Like where did that personality come from? Was it you mostly? Was it a conscious decision, or was it?
Yeah, it is. It's not natural for me. So I'm a shy, quiet, introverted person. And as my wife will tell you, and I think if you had seen me in my previous roles, each of them had a different flavor, but that wasn't the kinds of things I did in those other positions. But it was intentional, and the purpose had several pieces to it. One was a trying to make the university more personable. It's a big place, 50,000 students and 30,000 employees.
One of the biggest in the nation.
Yeah. One of the largest. And a budget that's $8 billion a year, if you can imagine, if you include hospitals and everything that we own. So how do you make a place like that more personable? Well, the president has this, not just the soapbox, but this huge visibility. So if I did things that made me more personable, I felt like it would make the university a kinder place, a gentle place. And I would use words like love and kindness and things of that nature. Overlaid on that, knowing that this is a place, and we can talk about this as well, that we had real ambitions to grow research and our stature and all of that. So you can both have what I called purposeful fun, as well as work hard and achieve things. So we tried. I had never used Twitter before, and I remember my first tweet. I went to the Alligator, the student newspaper's office, and had them show me how to use Twitter, and the purpose was just to communicate, and in this case, communicate a few things that about the university, and it wasn't just to students; it was to families. Just amazing how many family members felt like they knew the university through what they saw me doing.
They saw the social media posts, the videos, football games.
Yeah. And I would do fun things like if I saw a student on the phone, usually I can guess, they're calling their parent or calling a friend, and I would say, "Who you talking to?" And they say, "Oh, I'm talking to my mom." They say, "Give me the phone."
"Hello, mother."
Yeah, get the phone. They say, "Who is this?" "Why do you have my daughter's phone?" Okay. But also to faculty and others. So like April 1st this week, my department chair here in electrical engineering played an April Fool's prank on the whole department. And he said, "Oh, you inspired me, Kent." I said, No, don't blame me. Okay. But it
what did you do?
Yeah, it not that everybody has to do everything like I did it, obviously, but others can be more effective, I think, naturally.
What was the joke that...
his joke. I didn't like it. His joke was, because I believed it. His joke was that he was resigning as department chair and was going to another university. I believed it. But
that's part of the charm,
there were some hints later on that I missed, because he even had April Fools at the bottom. I didn't get to that part.
You started gossiping. It's like, can you believe this guy is resigning?
Yeah, I almost sent it to other people, but thank heavens I didn't. But he did trick me.
But that's interesting. Yeah. So you're basically saying that it was, in a way, an example.
Yes.
Right? You wanted to give some sort of lesson to faculty, to students.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely talk about the rankings and all the ambitions. So maybe why did you see a need for it, maybe? Or it was just your intuition from the beginning of this is something that we need to do. We need to make this place not only more excellent, but more kinder, maybe is the word.
Yeah. That's the word I use. I don't think it was a problem here, But I do believe that often when universities are truly excellent or at the top in some way or the best in their field or in some fields, they can also become less kind, less welcoming. There are many examples. I remember, for example, and this has nothing to do with UF, but in my previous job, the last job I had at Cornell as provost, we were searching for the dean of the law school, and I met with the faculty in the College of Law at Cornell, and asked them, what kind of dean should we search for, and then they asked me, and I said, well, I would like a dean that raises the stature of the College of Law, makes it, it was already really good, but make it have a reputation so it is among the very, very, very best. And to my surprise, the faculty said, no, we don't want that. And I said, what? You don't want that? And they said, here's why. And the reason they said is all those other law schools, I won't name them, but those other law schools that are thought of as better than us are not friendly places. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to have a College of Law like that. So that kind of thinking is something I think you do have to address. I think you can be excellent at still.
Right. And that's what you try to implement, right? You said, okay, this is useful information. Like, I understand how you can become that, but you can be both.
Yeah.
You can be excellent, you can be kind. So let's pursue both explicitly.
Right.
So let's talk about the rankings. Because that was in your exit video, you said you wanted to raise billions of dollars for the university, not raise the tuition while you were president, and raise UF to be top 10 public university. We'll talk about the first two, but on the ranking, you not only achieved top 10, you achieved top 5. What was okay, first of all, maybe when we reached top 5, I was already a student, and of course you do feel like some sort of, okay, this is awesome, like in a place where it's trying to become as excellent as possible, like trying to be the best, and that's awesome. Like, that's kind of one of the points why we pursue our education. However, I did see a lot of comments from students that said, oh, okay, we're top 5, but it's those rankings, right? It's like, okay, we're top. So it was like some hesitation, which was interesting because, okay, and then if you do not believe the rankings, then what is there? Like, how what can you, because there needs to be some kind of measurement. So how was that thinking of you of we need to be as best as possible? One way to measure that is with the rankings of the university. But it, of course, can veer off, right? You can over-optimize some metric and then not really do what you meant to do from the beginning. Was that a concern ever for you? And was that ever a concern for you? And if not, how was your relationship with the rankings? What was the top or one of the top goals to make? What was that?
Yeah, well, first off, it's obviously the president doesn't achieve any of these things. It's the university that achieves them, obviously. For sure. So I'm not trying to say I did it. And that
you push for it, right? You push for it.
Yeah, the president's main role is set the goal, okay? And everybody else has to do it, okay? Which makes it easy for the president. I firmly believe, I just really believe that what I call the stature of a organization, particularly if it's a college or a department or a university, is important because that stature really, for example, empowers alumni. If there's a company that's working to recruit you or another university where you want to go work and they've never heard of the university where you got your degree, they probably don't think as highly about you, no matter who you are, as if you'd come from, quote, a more prestigious
Yeah, which is not
university.
necessarily
So-
a good thing in itself, but it's a
Right.
thing that happens.
That's the way it is.
It's a
That's
thing
the way
that
it
happens.
is. That's the way it is. So there's the perception, and I believed that we could enhance the perception. Our university is relatively young. I mean, 1800s, but still, that's young. We're 100 years younger as a university than University of Michigan. We're 200 years younger than the University of North Carolina. University of Virginia is even older than that, and those are ones that are considered, our competitive peers, for example. And the time means a lot in how people perceive universities. And that's the case for the whole state of Florida. Higher ed is relatively young here, so there was room to change people's perceptions, not so much within the state, but outside of the state of Florida. And we wanted to work on that for the benefit of not our ego, but for the benefit of our students, our alumni, our faculty, everybody. And then secondly, there was a decision to raise the reality, not just the perception, but the reality. And
Yes.
you can't measure everything, obviously. I'm a computer engineer, electrical engineer, and I can evaluate the excellence of other electrical engineering departments, or I used to be able to, but I can't really, as an individual, evaluate humanities departments and others. But there are metrics. There are, in my field, citation indexes. There's your graduate students that you're graduating. How are they doing? There is the funding that you might bring in. There are metrics, and we decided we'd work on those metrics. One of the metrics that we saw early that we felt was not good was the student to faculty ratio. How many students do you have per faculty, particularly at the undergrad level? And we were, if you look at what are considered the top 50 or 60 research universities in the nation, we were near the bottom in that ratio. And I knew that's not so good for anybody to have either too few faculty or too many students, okay? And we decided not to reduce the students, but to keep this number of undergrads the same and grow the faculty. So in the past 10 years, we're the only university that's grown in the whole nation that's grown the faculty by 600. And that helps everything. It gives more time to the faculty. Their classes aren't as large. It makes them more accessible to the students. It means your total research dollars grow. Your reputation should grow, particularly if you're hiring great faculty, to add to the ones you have. So the ranking overall is a metric that many people understand outside of universities, but obviously what's important is the reality behind it, and that is the perception of people. That's important. I think the student to faculty ratio is really important. And there were other metrics that we worked on, class size. We just worked on everything we could think of that might affect.
For example,
excellence.
metrics that I saw kind of around that supposedly the ranking institutions use is like student outcomes, faculty resources, finances, alumni giving, peer assessment.
Yeah.
Was there
Yeah.
any of those or metrics that you said, okay, this would increase our ranking, but maybe this is not necessarily the thing to do? Was there situations like that?
Well, they each had kind of a
Sweet
flip
spot.
side to them. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned alumni giving. That's the percentage, the metric. Now, it turns out that U.S. News, the more famous of the rankings, doesn't use that anymore as of a year ago. But the metric was the percentage of your actually undergrad alumni that give back any funds, even $1, back to the university averaged over a couple of years. And that is one where, again, we were not very good. But in my last year as president, we were number one amongst all publics. The privates do better. Now, what's the bad part about that? Well, it's not really bad. It's just that it's not there's not a lot of value in it by itself. But the good part, setting aside the ranking, the good part is, as the private universities know, is that if for example young alumni give back a gift, maybe $50 to their college or their department or to their organization they were based in, someday some of those are going to be really wealthy, and they have now a pattern of giving. They'll probably give a lot someday. So just to get them engaged with the university is good. So having more alumni engaged, whether it's giving or coming back for alumni weekend or whatever. Yeah. So we were not so good, and many publics are not so good at getting their alumni to give. They just focus on big giving dollars, which is what makes the big difference in funding. But having higher percentage involved is also good in the long run. It's good for alumni. And you see that in the privates. A place like Princeton, 50% of their alumni every year will do something to the university. It's not because they're all wealthy. It's just because they want to be involved. Yeah. And that's good.
And that maybe speaks a little bit of the experience that they all had during the university, that not only was an education that they had, they went to classes and that's it. They probably had something else that made them continue contributing, continue getting involved somehow, as you said, not only giving money, but going to the football game or visiting and giving a talk or something like that.
Yep. Often that networking that continues is really important.
Okay.
For them as well as the university.
Okay. So you mentioned the money side. What I mean is the amount of the money that alumni donate to the university, right? Was there ever a persuasion that you needed to do because of what people claim to happen is the decline of higher education? If you've heard about that there's this perception that at least some narratives have been pushing around, that some specific groups say that the higher education is declining, at least maybe in the US. What would you assess? How would you assess that? Would you say that's true? And if so, imagine even if it wasn't true, you had to maybe deal with that perception in alumni's mind, if it even existed.
Right. Yeah, definitely the polls, and there are all kinds of polls that come out nationally assessing the public's perception of the value of higher education. That's the public's perception of the value of higher education. And that has declined. Nothing to do with the University of Florida, just it's declined for all of higher education. That is obviously concerning, particularly for a public university. Now, within the state of Florida, and if you want, we can talk about this more later, but within the state of Florida, the state has been really generous. Almost every other state, the state's investment has declined for the public universities, and their tuition has tripled, or gone up by four times as the state's gone down. And therefore, if you look at the investment per student, at almost all public universities outside of the state of Florida, and I mean state colleges too, their revenue is mostly from tuition and very little of it from the state. Ours is the opposite. Most of it is from the state and very little is from tuition. I mean, the tuition part is important, but it's that curve is not crossed.
Which is maybe a small factoid that I've seen that it's important to notice, is that whenever I for this I was preparing, I was seeing the rankings and everything, and you see within public and private all of the universities listed in order of the ranking, and their tuition next to it is like $60K, $60K,
Right.
$60K, $60K, $60K,
Right.
$60K, $60K, 20, 30, I think UF was. Something like that, 30. So I don't know sure if that's like the average or what exactly the number is, but at least that tells you something, that UF definitely is giving you a lot of value for your money, I would say. At least for my experience, it gave me a lot of value for my money.
Oh, it's stunning. Ours is half of what the next lowest tuition is of the top 50 universities. 50. Okay, so it's just stunning, the value. But we were talking about the public perception, and absolutely, it really concerns me. I don't have great insight into all the factors. Again, it's not UF, but it's all the factors. I did not perceive that when I was president, and it's been a year now, so I don't know the latest perception, but I didn't perceive that amongst our alumni. And as I said, it certainly wasn't the perception amongst the state elected officials, because they were growing their investment, even on a percentage basis. So maybe I do think a lot of it has to do with the dramatic increase in tuition, which we didn't have. So that's one factor. But there are probably others as well. In terms of fundraising and gifts to the university, I spent most of my time in that area just developing relationships with those that had the biggest capacity, so they could, if they were interested, in invest back. And a lot of what we did was not telling them what our priorities were and saying, please give, $1 million for this priority, but it was learning about their own interests. And an example would be, we're in Malachowski Hall, and Chris Malachowski, who's a graduate actually at my department, electrical engineering, before he was a co-founder of NVIDIA, he had no interest in a building and funding a building or having his name on a building. He wanted to do something that would help the university in a very kind of tangible, noticeable way. And so we started with him. We talked to him for years. Not myself only, but the dean of engineering, the department chairs, all kinds of people. And in the end, he and his co-founder, who's currently the CEO of NVIDIA, said, what we'd like to do is to donate to you our best NVIDIA AI machine. And if you do, as a university, interesting things with that, this is Chris Malachowski. We can talk about the building that you keep telling me about, okay? And so that's when this idea of the AI university and having AI embedded in all aspects of the university, even in the arts, not just in your area of interest, in autonomous vehicles and robots and sensors, but in the arts and agriculture and medicine. And when Chris Malachowski saw that happening and the curriculum changing and degrees being created in business and other areas with an AI focus to it, he said, okay, I want to write a check for the building. So, and so it was, these are grateful alumni that have done well. And it's really important that we use their funds in ways that they want the funds to be used. And some of them want to support students, some of them just all kinds of things, student clubs, and yeah.
Yeah, so, and you were speaking that this certain amount of circles they interacted with, it definitely seemed that they were with the perception that this is an institution worth continue and giving back, and it'll be valuable not only for future generations, even for me. I can get, if I'm the head of NVIDIA, I can get as many great engineers from UF as I can. Right. People will already have experience with the supercomputer, people. And the cool thing you also mentioned, not only with engineering, but with the arts, humanities, and all of the extras and the different areas that UF has. Yeah. But you did mention that the donors you wanted to give the donors as much autonomy in their decision making of what happens with their money. So that definitely can go south. It can definitely go into a place where the donor wants to do this, but I think that's a terrible idea as university president. Right. How did you manage that? And probably not only, even I can imagine for you, it happened not only with, I want you to spend my money this way, but I gave you all of this money, therefore you do this in this other unrelated thing to me completely, right?
That happens all the time at universities and other nonprofits. And university presidents are often involved in that. And sometimes the donor's interests will change. Sometimes it's a matter of the conditions that the donor puts on those funds and sometimes universities will change priorities. Over time, things change. My wife and I are minor donors, but to different organizations, including UF. But I always, because I've had these positions, I try to tell my wife, I say, let's just give funds that are unrestricted. And her view is the opposite, because I said, and let them use it however they want to use it. And her view is, no, she has specific projects. So we have these big arguments about she wants a specific project. I want it to be unrestricted, because I've had to deal with the issues of trying to sometimes
deal with the requests.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just not worth the effort over time.
Sure.
Take your money back. That's rare, but I also know the real value of those unrestricted funds. So.
Yeah. So how was it? Maybe could you speak to situations, of course not specifically like this person said this and that, but how do you manage that, right? Like I imagine there's a lot of negotiation maybe with the donors. It's like, okay, we'll accept the money, but we won't do these things, we will do this, maybe we can do this other thing, something like that. I imagine it's the process.
Exactly, that's it. And sometimes it's over many years, and sometimes it is on rare occasion you realize, and the donor realizes that you're just not going to end up at the same place, and that's okay. That's okay too. It's their investment, but that happens rarely. Almost always, that you find, and the donor may have graduated from business or engineering or something else, but yet they want to invest in the arts or finer performing or visual arts, or they may want to invest in athletics. And so we work, the organization, that's why you have this fundraising organization, they work to bring together interests and finding faculty that may match the donor's interest.
Right.
Sometimes you can't. And
sometimes
that's okay.
you can't. And the reason why I think sometimes you cannot is just maybe even ideological disagreements, right? The donor has this viewpoint, and maybe the university as a whole does not necessarily want to follow that. I say that because I want to explore a bit into this perception that there exists that universities tend or has been increasingly become more liberal, right? More to the left, to the left side of the political scale, if you want to choose that scale between left and right. So I think it's interesting in Florida, because Florida is this, in UF specifically, because it's in this very interesting place where I would say, and I imagine you would agree, that Gainesville tends to be aligned to the left, but the last few administrations over the years have been tending to align with the right side of politics, meaning what policies they want to pursue in the decisions they want to do. So how has that played out in your role as president? Like, were you concerned? Imagine you were concerned about politics for sure. Yeah. But yeah, how did that play out? Like, did you want it to come off in your role as communicator? You wanted to come off as a neutral institution outside of politics. You wanted to come up with, okay, we have this certain amount of values and we do want to preserve them. And of course, keeping in mind that there's money coming in and there's people that might disagree with those opinions that you say, right?
Yes, because we're part of the state also has the ability to not just change funding, but to pass laws that say you can't use funding for, as just happened since I left, the president's office, a law was passed saying you can't use state dollars to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you if anything, you want to avoid laws getting passed because laws last a long time. Okay, there are legislative sessions every year, but so you always have opportunity to get funding. But if a law is passed, that's where you don't want to go usually in terms of regulating the university. It's very true that the majority of university faculty are more on the left side than the right side. You can just look at voter registration. I'll give you an example. So is my previous job, but it probably would be the same here. So when I was president, I did not affiliate with either the Democrat or the Republican Party. It was unaffiliated. But previously, when I was in New York, I was registered as a Republican. It's public, and the student newspaper, called the Daily Sun, there at Cornell, went through before one of the elections when I was there as provost, and they found out all the affiliations. I guess it was publicly accessible of all of the leaders, all the vice presidents, the president, okay. and all of them, and the department chairs. And then they actually looked at some of the departments. So they published the political affiliations of, there it's called the government department. Here it would be called political science. So the political science professors, all their affiliations, Democrat, Republican, or unaffiliated. And then of the deans and vice presidents, the provost and the president. So on that whole list, I was the only Republican. The whole list.
Oh,
okay,
no way.
Okay.
That's funny.
So except
really,
except in the government department, and they didn't give the names of the professors, but they said how many were Democrat and how many were Republican. There was one Republican.
Oh,
So I called the department chair. I wanted to have fun. I said to him, I said, I'm glad there's another Republican on campus. He's in your department. And he said, and I don't know to this day if he was serious. He said, yeah, it's a big scandal. We didn't think we had any in our department. We're going to find out who it is and get rid of them. Okay.
No way.
I think he was joking. Okay, but anyway, but it is true that it's not that way. Everybody's a Democrat, but and it depends on the area of the university as well, which is interesting. But that doesn't mean that the courses we teach are indoctrination of only liberal values and no conservative values. That doesn't mean that this is a place where everybody that graduates is now going to vote Democrat. That does not mean that at all. What we just have to do, and is really important, is to help the public understand and not have anecdotes that can be used against us, that we teach the merits of the full political spectrum, and we teach what the disadvantages or the warts are of different viewpoints on different issues, whether it's internationally.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really important. And most importantly is that we help the public understand that we're educating the students so they can make their own decisions, but think through them. And that's not easy. The whole nation's wrestling with that. We even see that now with the Middle East situation with Gaza and Israel, and we're all trying to figure out how we can talk to each other and wrestle with this. But it's really important that universities not be viewed as places of indoctrination. I don't believe they are, but on the other hand, we as faculty and we as universities need to provide evidence that we're not. And that means, I believe, indeed having more conservative perspectives amongst the faculty, having speakers that are from a wide spectrum. I don't mean crazy people from either side, but people that can make a solid argument for their own viewpoint.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree with that, and I think it's great. So you mentioned about the proofs or like actual things that you can show that, okay, we're not places of indoctrination. At the very least, I can say my experience. I mean, as you know, I did a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I'm right now in the graduate school of mechanical engineering. I don't think I've ever heard anything remotely political in any of my, at the very least, engineering classes, because I didn't do.
Right.
I did my associates in Miami, so all my humanities classes were in Miami. In here, like, I had no clue what the political affiliations of my faculty were.
Right.
We're just focusing on engineering.
Yeah. And that's the way it is with 95%.
Right. And even hopefully, as you said, that when you go to the political subjects where you're supposed to talk about this stuff, you do so ideally in a broad way. It's like, this is the options that's out there. You choose for yourself, which you've said, like, you value the student ending up with his or her own conclusions of what's going on.
Yeah. And you as a faculty member, let's say I'm a political science professor, which I'm not, but if I am, you can do research and publish and have an opinion on your areas of expertise that may, classify you as liberal or but you can have that. But the important part is, and those arguments are public and they're in your papers or books that you write. But it's important that then you allow the students to argue with you and you present the counter arguments. So it's not like you as a professor don't have an opinion.
Right, you do have your opinion.
Yeah, but you're not there.
You welcome the discussion.
Yeah, you want that.
Yeah,
you want that. Yeah,
that's one of the purpose of the university.
Yeah.
Welcome that free discussion.
Yep.
That different viewpoints can be expressed.
Yeah, and I would even say, going beyond that, not just welcome it, but actually cultivate it. So have, again, not racist or crazy viewpoints, but viewpoints that do represent not just the same thing that I believe in, but different viewpoints. Yeah.
Okay, great. Continuing a bit on the subject, but more towards what we talked about before with the state. As I mentioned, the state has been predominantly Republican for the past years. And even more specifically, the current administration, like Governor DeSantis, has been is one of the top Republican, right? He would just run for president, whatever. Like, so what has been that relationship like? Because most likely, well, not most likely, they for sure have this perspective of the universities are places of indoctrination for the left-leaning politics. What was that relationship with the state with you? Like, what, as you mentioned, you get most of the money from the state.
Right.
And yeah, how was that? I imagine it was difficult you sometimes had to put your ground as hard as you can and say, okay, we're not giving in, but other times it's like, okay, we need the money, right? Like, what was maybe that proportion of times versus one or the other?
Yeah, the university president does spend a lot of time in Tallahassee talking to all of the elected officials there on both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, and then also in the governor's office, chief of staff, the governor and his team. And it's not like the governor is calling different university presidents and telling them what they should do. I never got a call from Governor DeSantis, and I never had a individual, just he and me talking. I've met with him in his office with his team and some of our government relations people, but it's not like he's calling me. I should say Governor Scott had a different style. Governor Scott did have my cell phone number and would call me, but it wasn't about political issues. It was about other things.
Okay.
So, which is interesting, things that they needed help on. So he would just call me. But Governor DeSantis didn't do that. Just a different way of working.
Sure.
But on the other hand, what I felt what was most important was not so much what they did with the budget in a given year, because there was always the next year, but the laws that get passed, and we would work hard every year, and developing trust so that they knew that if they showed us a draft law, that we would give them input on it. And that happened many times where
That's
there
great.
there were laws that would have been very draconian in terms of the university and what it could do, that we were able to modify it so we could work under it. But there are always laws that eventually get passed. I think almost every year, that do constrain us in different ways. Right now within engineering, the college is wrestling with the law that was passed this past year around countries of concern.
I've had to deal with that. It's been annoying. Yeah. I cannot purchase anything drone related from countries of concern.
Right.
It's been annoying, but it is what it is, right?
Yep. So, which includes China and Iran and Russia, etc. And within engineering, it's really important that we be able to recruit the very best students, for example, from those countries. I think it's really good for the nation. On the other hand, these are nations that have had bad actors as their leaders, and so, and this was not Republicans against the Democrats. This was
United States.
But both sides, Democrats and Republicans, were supporting this issue. So that's one where we're all trying to figure out how to accomplish what's best, not just for the university, but for the nation. And I think we need to be a little more flexible. But on the other hand, we also, even as a university, need to take national security seriously. So those are the kind of things that we would deal with, and they're usually around concepts and principles, not so much just Democrat or Republican. It's and sometimes there's a disagreement about those principles. I was the president that created our chief diversity office, and I hired the first person, and when he went to Colorado, I hired the second one, and that office no longer exists. So, but I do think there is some common ground around that. We want the institution to represent people from all backgrounds and ethnicities, and we want them all to flourish. So there's that common ground, and now we have to figure out how to do it. Okay, so without it being too political.
So on that of how the politics affect the university, maybe one of the examples could be the TikTok ban, right? That it was banned because of not necessarily left-right issues, but whole nation concern of foreign actors intervening into universities. So I thought it was interesting, but specifically another situation which probably was one of the hardest ones for you to navigate was the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Right.
And from what I saw, it was particularly interesting that you, in that scenario, it was very divided, right? In the sense that you have pressures from both sides hard. Right. And you could see that after in the articles, like, for example, faculty taking this opinion as a whole, as like with their union saying that we're very against the policies the university has been taking. We don't feel that you have been stronger with the measures and the actions, that the precautions you've taken. And of course, you have the university, the state, saying kind of the complete opposite, like let's free everything as fast as possible. Maybe talk about how was that period for you? I imagine it was very stressful for you.
Oh, it is.
Of how was that navigation between the internal pressures between politics, between this in maybe mostly internal side of students and faculty saying this thing, state, but also that doesn't really matter because it's like the decisions of should we act, how precautious should we be, which I think is the more important question, right? Like we have this situation, maybe there's some uncertainty within the situation, like we don't really know what's going on, maybe in the very early days. yeah, how did you navigate all of that?
Right, right. No, those are really emotional times for all of us, and that's what I think made it the most difficult. Was how it just touched everybody, and obviously stressful for everybody, and knowing that this is life and death because people were dying. I had a brother who died from COVID.
Okay.
I won't go into the details,
That's fine.
but he had a perspective, and it was different than mine about how to protect yourself. But he died, and he's 9 years younger than me. So these are just really really tough times, and particularly ones that none of us had ever dealt with before. So. And it evolved, it just kept changing all the time. And in terms of what was available, what our view was internally, what the state did. I will say that one asset that we had that most universities didn't have is we had what I'll just call broadly UF Health, and all the hospitals here and just right here within walking distance. And that gave me a lot of comfort. I remember the first time that I heard Dr. Mike Lazardo, who we eventually put in charge of our whole response, telling me about the way you can manage this through testing and protecting, and that's when I first felt like, okay, maybe we're going to be okay.
Which, if you don't mind me interrupting, I thought it was excellent. Like, I thought I was here while I was a student in UF. I was very impressed about the measures that the university had. Like, we could test whenever we wanted to, if we wanted to.
Right.
As much test as we wanted, and they, given the result of the test, you would isolate or you could just continue with your classes.
Right.
But I thought, at least I don't really remember any time that I said, okay, the university is really screwing up with this one. Like, it was a hard time. So you had to probably navigate a lot with the expert opinion that was being created within UF. Like, were you really involved in those
Oh yes, every day
discussions of there's consensus within the medical community, but maybe there's not. There's another opinion within our own really awesome medical community.
Right.
So how was
and
was that?
Again, I too was just so impressed but grateful to all that UF Health did and all that team. There were a lot of people, just hundreds of people that worked full time, stopped everything they did, and for multiple years worked on it. And then every day gave myself and others advice about what to do because they were monitoring what's going on. But you may remember that. So we had several forces. Everybody had an opinion. Okay, there was a huge contingent of our community that felt we should require everybody to be tested,
Vaccinated, even when the vaccines came out,
and require masks and require then later vaccines. We, by the state, were not allowed to require those things. But we did have the ability to communicate and say. As we would have signs that would say, if you enter this building, you're expected to wear a mask. Not required, but you're expected. Okay,
which I think most people did,
and most people did.
Yeah.
That's the point. We didn't have to have the requirement, which we weren't allowed to have, but we didn't have to have it. If I was totally in control of everything and didn't have others that were involved, sure, I'd make things required. But that's not, even as a nation, we don't require people we don't mandate people to be vaccinated. We sometimes put conditions on certain things. But we did have that ability, and that's where the disagreements came about. It was fundamentally about what's required versus what is expected. And it sounds like a fine line, but boy, there's a lot of emotion there.
Yeah, because there's definitely different opinions into what each person considers to be safe.
Right.
Like
Right.
more, there were definitely some people that said, yeah, if I get the disease, it's like
Exactly.
I'll be sick for like I'll sneeze 2 times and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But then there were some other people that definitely
Right.
had to be and were very, very careful with it.
Yeah. 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 But
And
it's
even faculty, right? Even
Right.
faculty tend to be like on the older
Right.
age. So
right.
it was difficult.
It was, but overall, the university did well.
I would say so.
And yep. In terms of both the health as well as the reality, were there challenging times? What were there times when large contingents of the community wanted to be totally online, and we were not allowed to be totally online? Absolutely. But even in the midst of all that, university did well, both in terms of not just staying healthy, which is number one, but also in terms of continuing effective education and research and everything else. Yeah.
Okay. Continue with other situation where it was split within the political side. It was the voting rights controversy, if you could call it that title. That it's very hard to summarize the whole thing, but maybe you could do a better job than me. But I'll try to do it very quickly, just for the sake of it. So,
And I'll correct you if you have anything wrong.
yeah, please. There were 3 professors that were trying to express their opinion as experts in a specific judicial case that was concerning elections. Maybe we can leave it at that. Yeah. And that the university at the beginning said there's conflicts of interest in this specific situation, therefore you're not allowed to present your opinion as experts. After some time, then of course there was backlash from the experts, from the faculty, and it was maybe an important point that is relevant, that of course, since it was election related, it was having to do with the state, which influences the university as a public institution. Then after some time, the university reversed that decision. I think I wanted to get your internal opinion of what was going on in those situations, right?
Sure.
Like, why at the beginning, yes. And I understand that there was some process change, and now the process is a lot better of making those conflict of interest decisions. But yeah, were there pressures to do, like, really important pressures to do one decision versus another? Why was the reversal? Pretty much is.
Yeah.
That was the interesting part for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the one aspect that's interesting is that the whole situation was internal. It wasn't like until it became public. Once it became public, then everybody had an opinion. And actually, that's how I learned about it. I read about it. Yeah, I read about it in the national news. That's how I found out about it. Okay, so it's not like there were, deep discussions going on about what decision should we make, and then until it was public, and then we all had to get involved. And then once it became public, then the politician, then it became external. So it was all. And what happened was it's pretty straightforward. And it wasn't just that. There was some others cases. It was a matter of whether, it was very simply, it's a matter whether employees of the university, and employees, therefore, are employees of the state of Florida,
right.
Whether they can serve as expert witnesses in litigation that involves the state of Florida.
Right.
So
right.
you could extrapolate it. If you're an employee of a company, can you then serve as an expert witness in litigation that involves that company, where you're taking the other side?
Which in most of the cases, when you say it like that, it's like, oh, for sure, no. It's like, that's obvious, right?
Yeah. Well, so, but what's different here is this concept of academic freedom, which is sacred. So it wasn't. There was never an issue of whether faculty or other employees could express their opinion. They all did. They were all published. They had editorials. All that's allowed. It's very simply, it was a specific case of serving as expert witnesses in cases involving the state of Florida, their employer. So, I found out about it. The provost found out about it from the public papers, the New York Times, to be specific in my case. And that occurred, it was either Friday or Saturday where I found out about it. And then once it hits the press, everybody gets involved. And
like,
so everything slows down.
Yeah,
no
damage
longer
control.
can I just make an opinion, but now we've got all the trustees, we've got board of governors, we've got all the elected officials, they all have opinions. And we have to navigate that. But fortunately, by Friday, we were able to get to the position where we said yes. People have other opinions, that about what we should do, but yes, we need to allow this. So within a week, we had the situation resolved, and then that was in November, early November, and by the end of November, we had actually changed all the processes so it wouldn't happen again. So I wouldn't get surprised, and the provost wouldn't get surprised. And now, if anyone is turned down, this is technically called a conflict of interest. There's also something called a conflict of commitment, which is your time. Are you spending too much time doing things, on a side business, expert witness or a company you have or whatever? That's different. This is conflict of interest. And we changed that whole process for rejecting cases that are based on conflict of interest. So now they actually automatically get appealed to the provost. This never got to the provost, never got appealed to the provost. We changed the processes. So now the provost will have the ultimate say, and there are faculty and deans involved at the different stages of denial. And so I believe now we have the most robust conflict of interest processes in the whole country of any university. Now the case went on because there was a lawsuit. The accreditation organization came and reviewed us, but it was all resolved in November, and we never changed that process. When the SACS, the accreditation organization, came in the spring, they said, "Okay, you're right. It's great now." Okay, so
and if you can touch a bit on the word that you mentioned, sacred. That it touched something important, right? And a way maybe to demonstrate it is, like, for example, FIRE is a very well-known institution that preserves the First Right Amendment.
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. They said, okay, after all of the process that you mentioned, the process that emerged, they said it was one of the most pro-free speech that they've seen. And it was great that they saw that you valued a lot, you put more important on the assumption that the professor can always express their opinions. Like I think it was something like, oh my God, maybe I'm misremembering the details, but it was the university has the burden to prove if there's not a conflict of interest. Like, you cannot say just automatically or no, right? Like, if you want to say no, then you have to come up with all this. Exactly. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that part. Yep. The university does have that burden to prove there's a conflict of interest that can harm the university. Now, again, there are still those that would argue that anyone that testifies against an employee that testifies against the employee of the state that testifies against the state of Florida is in a conflict of interest situation. So you can go down all these legal paths, but it's best in terms of what the tradition is in our nation that we allow this. And now we've set it up so that, again, we have some of the most robust. It doesn't mean that the faculty today still have to report that they're going to do this.
Right.
And it still has to be approved, but we have the most robust approval process.
Okay, so about to be done. You've been president. You were president for 8 years. You've had an amazing career. A lot of people loved everything that you did, loved the way that you communicated yourself to the world. What what in your life made it so that you became that? What are you grateful for in your life, Dr. Fuchs?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You know, for me personally, I have, I went to seminary after my engineering undergrad. I was going to become a minister in a church.
Wow. Okay.
And I did that for 3 years, got what's called a Master of Divinity degree, and then decided what I really wanted to do is work in a college. I thought of myself as a college teacher. I didn't know about research then. So then went back to University of Illinois to do graduate studies in electrical engineering. But, my faith is really important for me. And and for me, what that means is loving other people as well as God for me personally, that's what gives me hope for everything, not just me personally, but for the university. That this is, we're all blessed, and my role here is to help other people achieve what they want to achieve, which is good things in their life, happiness, success, and I've worked at that. As my wife would tell you, every day I have ways that I could be better in what I do, but I work at it and try to communicate that to others. Yeah.
Well, thank you for everything that you
Yeah.
did, Dr. Fuchs.
Oh, it was a privilege.
I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thanks for doing the podcast. How do you make a place like that more personable? Well, the president has this, not just the soapbox, but this huge visibility. So if I did things that made me more personable, I felt like it would make the university a kinder place, a gentle place. And I would use words like love and kindness.